I'm going to talk for a few minutes about digital transformation and how it's affecting all of us. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the complexity associated with how applications are being developed, the new ways they're being developed, and how this makes it harder and harder for traditional IT people in our industry to ensure that applications perform as expected. And then I'll touch base at the end on a new technology called software-defined wide area networking and how this is going to revolutionize networking the same way that server virtualization and the cloud has taken care of the data center. But the network still has a long way to go. So here's the clicker. Okay, so digital transformation, actually, there's a slide missing. Okay. Digital transformation is happening, and it's happening now. If you're like me, you're surprised at how quickly this is happening. I remember just saying 5 years ago that this is something that's going to be a lot more relevant down the road, but it's every parts of our lives, every industry is being revolutionized by how customers are engaging with industry and with government. So it's not something that's 5 years from now or even 1 year. It's happening, and it's happening now. And it's not just one industry or two. It's all industries. If you look at this picture here, whether it's the public sector, the healthcare, financial, retail, or manufacturing, every industry in this slide is being completely transformed by digital services and the desire to interact with their customers and their users in a digital way. And I'm going to give you one example here that you probably didn't see today, and I love this example. It's a company, John Deere. Everybody knows them. They've been in business for 100 years, and they make farm machinery. So how in the world is John Deere getting into the world of digital transformation? Well, you might be surprised to know that they're putting tablets on all of their tractors, and these tablets run applications that measure soil conditions and the amount of water in the soil, and they actually tell the farmer exactly how deep to plant the seed and what time of day to plant it. So what's happening is they're getting up to 25% more yield per acre. This is an incredible innovation that's being caused by technology in a very old industry, I might add. So I'm not going to bore you with another Uber slide about the driverless car. We've all seen that. But I am going to show you a new slide that kind of makes the point of how digital transformation is disrupting industry. And let's use the taxi industry as an example. So you may not be familiar with this, but in order to own and operate a taxi cab in New York City, you have to buy what's called a taxi medallion. And this is a very valuable commodity. It can cost, and people have paid as much as $1 million for a New York City tax medallion. So let's look at what happened to the price of a New York City tax medallion after Uber launched in 2014. This is what happened. This asset dropped in value by 55% in only 2.5 years. This is how disruptive digital transformation is to traditional industries. And it's no longer a matter of just disrupt or it's a matter of either disrupting or being disrupted. You can't wait for technology to catch up with you, because by the time you find out about digital innovation in your industry, it might be too late. So here's a good example in the government that a lot of people have heard about and have been talking about, and it's what's going on with the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services. So within the White House, they have the U.S. Digital Service, and their role is to marry the country's top technology talent with some of the toughest problems facing the government and how digital technology can help. And one example that I really like is what's happened with the electronic filing of green cards and the payment of immigration fees. The MyUSCIS application transformed the whole way constituents interact with the federal government. And quite frankly, it's an interaction which can be, to some extent intimidating. So while it's good that it saves the government a lot of money, it saves up to $33 million a year for the federal government, the greatest benefit of this new technology is it actually improves the end user experience that constituents have and creates an overall more satisfying interaction with the government. So what's driving all this? Undoubtedly, what's driving all this is the customer. Customer-driven is king. And it doesn't matter if you're a retail customer trying to buy something from your iPhone or if you're trying to just consume government services, it's the same thing. If you think about all of us here in the room, we all interact with technology, whether it's for work or for our personal lives, and we expect the government to be the same way. Government users and government employees, they want to interact with the government the same way that they deal with technology in their personal lives. So this is all being driven by customer, and it's not going to change anytime in the near future. So the heart of this digital services transformation is the applications that are making it all happen. No question, this is the huge tidal wave that's occurring in our industry, is the investment that's being made in new applications. Gartner says that companies, and I would argue the government, will have to invest 35% more money in software development technology going forward in the coming years. And it's not going to be to maintain legacy systems anymore. It's going to be to support the systems that are engaged in digital transformation that bring our constituents closer to us and make the government more effective. And another statistic from IDC, which is just a similar way to measure the same paradigm, is IDC saying is in order for enterprises to remain competitive, they're all going to have to hire at least twice as many software developers going forward. So a good example of some of the impacts that are going on in the industry. So how is IT dealing with all of this? IT is dealing with it by using new methods or systems of engagement. IT has evolved to support this completely new environment of rapid software development, and I'm going to paint a picture real quick of some of the differences between the old ways and the new ways that companies are dealing with technology innovation. The new systems of engagement, they deal with software development in an agile way versus the legacy approach, which is waterfall, where you may have sometimes 18 to 24 months between new application development. And in agile, applications are being modified and pushed out to consumers virtually in real time. It's a huge difference in the way technology is being developed. And normally, most of the time, when a developer is building an application, he or she's not thinking about hundreds or thousands of users. They're thinking about millions of users, because everybody who's got a handheld smartphone is a potential user. That's a complete difference. And they're designed different. The architecture of these applications and how they're being developed is completely different. They no longer adhere to this monolithic three-tier architecture. It's a completely different structure that's distributed, and it's called distributed microservices. So they have components that run in the public cloud. They also have components that touch on legacy systems of record. They might have a piece that goes to a third-party service. And it's a lot more complicated world in order to manage that application. And finally, most of the new applications development that's going on is born in the cloud. It starts in the cloud, it's tested in the cloud, it's deployed in the cloud. They may have to touch legacy systems of record at some point, but it's completely different than taking an application that was built 20 years ago or 10 years ago or even 5 years ago on the monolithic architecture of the last few decades and trying to migrate it to a cloud. The new systems are driven from the cloud. So what's the big problem that our industry, Riverbed, primarily in the networking industry, is trying to challenge? The biggest challenging is IT infrastructure primarily hasn't kept up. And more the analysts are saying it's not the servers and the storage, because servers and storage have evolved quite nicely over the last 10 years. It's the network. Networking technology really hasn't changed that much since the 90s. When you had hubs and spokes and every site got a router and it was configured in a black room and sent out there, and if anything ever happened to it, someone had to show up and make it work again. Those days are over. So while we have all these great new applications and digital services which are being launched, the problem is none of it's going to work if IT infrastructure doesn't keep up. And more, we're hearing that it's the network that needs the biggest overhaul. So here's an example from IDC. IDC says 60% of digital applications will not scale because organizations do not embrace a new strategic architecture. And it's not just about getting more bandwidth to the remote sites. Bandwidth is plentiful. There's plenty of bandwidth out there. It's the complexity associated with it. It's the way it interacts with lots of third-party services that makes networking so much more difficult and the need for a strategic architecture. Let's use this example just to paint the point. So this is an application a lot of you may have actually tried. It was first launched by Citibank, and it was very disruptive and innovative at the time. And it's the ability to take a picture of a check and automatically deposit it in your bank. Very complicated architecture. It touches on their legacy system of record. It runs in the public cloud, depends on third-party services, and actually had a component running at either Verizon or AT&T, I can't remember which, all working in a distributed fashion, and they couldn't get it to work. They were getting ready to launch, and the system was just running too slow, and they couldn't figure it out. So it really paints the picture of the complexity. Eventually, they figured out it was a third-party service. I think it was an application development tool that running on a third-party service that no one even considered to look at, because those types of things, they just work. That's never where you look to solve the problem. So this is the new landscape for applications. They're very distributed in nature, and they're much harder to support. So this is the way the network looks now. This is a whole new paradigm where applications are deployed all over the globe and users are distributed everywhere. It's quite different than the traditional network I described a minute ago, where everything was organized into neat little boxes and you had hubs and spokes and remote sites. The new network is more like this picture here, with applications in the cloud, applications in the private data center, applications running over private services. And if you look at data and users, they're pretty much everywhere. And it's not just the civilian government that I'm talking about, which is the place where most people think network, software-defined networking or network automation needs to occur. It's the entire government. If you look at DoD, for example, even though they're not a big user or big consumer of public cloud technology yet, the challenges they have based on the sheer amount of data that they're moving over the network is just mind-boggling. And they have the added complexity of moving data over satellites, which introduces latency, which is a whole new variable they have to account for. So they have the same need as IRS or Postal Service to find new ways to automate and simplify networking in order to support their mission. It's just a different way to go about the same problem. So that kind of describes the opportunity. We have this fantastic opportunity of digital transformation that's going on, but it's also introducing a whole new set of challenges. The problem is the tools that are used in order to manage the new applications that are being launched, by and large, have not kept up, and more, it's the network that needs the most help. This is your new network reality. It's incredibly complex, insecure, and looks unpredictable. You have to deal with this in our world because this is the way applications are evolving. So how do we fix this? So this is the world that we operate in at Riverbed, and we're coming up with new technologies to automate and simplify network orchestration and network management, something that looks a little bit more friendly, like network in a cloud, network in your hand. What you have and what you need is a single connectivity fabric to connect the WAN, the cloud, all your branch sites to your data center. And I'm not talking about the data center, once again, because data centers, by and large, kept up pretty well. I'm talking about everything else. 50% of all IT infrastructure spend occurs outside the headquarters and outside of the data center. It's at the remote sites. And that's where we need the most work right now. So how would such a system be deployed? What would it look like? Such a system would allow you to manage a network from a cloud service provider, Amazon Web Services, pick one, and would allow you to completely design, deploy, and manage a network for all your remote sites from within your cloud provider. It's a really cool thing that's, or at least up till now, has not been available. And it would use common language commands and simple graphical interfaces to allow you to deploy network services across the globe. For example, if you use link video conferencing, for instance, link video conferencing is very data intensive, has both voice and video components that go over the network. And you could, for instance, from your cloud console, say, I want this group of users in that geography because of their access to high-speed internet to run all of their link video over the internet via a private tunnel back to us. But their data is going to go over the private circuit being provided by AT&T because that's the part that we absolutely have to have on all the time at low latency. So that's the type of thing that today is very hard to administer and orchestrate. And the new technology being introduced by software-defined wide area networking will allow you to do it right from Amazon. Very cool. So that gets me to the end of my presentation. We just launched a product called SteelConnect, which is software-defined wide area networking for the cloud era. I won't talk too much about it here, but at least I've given you some perspective on the challenge that we're trying to solve for the community of customers that we support in the federal government in particular. So I want to thank everyone for hanging in there today and staying with us until 11:15. I would love to talk to anyone afterwards if you have any questions about this technology, so thank you very much for being here.